think you have to consent to it. Did you consent?
I said, got it.
Great. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm CKV and I'm on call with Blast Furnace from CBR Chat. We were planning to talk about Anadrol in a pre-workout context and in general. So Blast here is really knowledgeable about compounds, chemical compounds, PEDs in general. So I thought it would be nice to have him on board just to talk us through Anadrol because it is something he's had a lot more experience with than I have. So that's the point of this call. So Blast, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Blast Furnace from CBR Chat. I am just a hobbyist, PED enthusiast. No special credentials or anything like that, but very enthusiastic about performance enhancing drugs and really enjoy reading about this stuff and experimenting with them. I have a lot of experience with Anadrol specifically. Yeah, and I'm really happy to just talk about it today.
I think one of the major questions that I had is why does so this is just to go on the do you mind just giving us an introduction about Anadrol as a drug?
Sure, yeah. So it's a DHT derivative. It's an oral anabolic steroid. So like all effective oral anabolic steroids, it's 17 alpha alkylated, so it's really bad for your liver, and it's orally bioavailable. It's considered to be one of the strongest steroids. Like it doesn't stand up against things like check drops or halotestin, but those are not commonly used anabolic steroids. So of the 10 commonly used anabolic steroids, Anadrol is considered one of the top dogs. It's great for lean muscle mass, and it's great for strength. So it's used by a lot of strength athletes. It's a really good compound.
In terms of also, I've noticed, what is the binding affinity of Anadrol when it comes to, is there any data on what the binding affinity is? And do you know anything about the half-life of the compound? And I have a question to chain on the basis of that as well, but I'll let you answer this first.
Sure. I mean, its half-life is quote unquote unknown, but it's pretty long. So it's guessed to be between like 6 and 18 hours, I think. So twice a day administration, if you're the kind of person that wants to have, stable levels, which is a fine thing to do. Its binding affinity, if I recall correctly, is pretty low. And I think that a lot of its action is actually mediated by one of its metabolites, which is mestenolone, or 17 alpha methyl DHT, which is why Anadrol sucks as an injectable or sublingual anabolic, because mestenolone is only produced in the liver. If you inject it, or if you take it sublingually and it gets absorbed through the lingual artery, you're not going to produce any mestenolone. And anecdotally, people have not been very happy with injectable Anadrol. Boston Lloyd loved injectable Anadrol, but I don't think through the amounts of PEDs he was using, you could necessarily suss out the effects of the injectable Anadrol versus everything else that he was on, per se. And I mean, if you inject 100 milligrams of anything pre-workout, you're going to get some sort of a buzz out of it anyway. But if I recall correctly, Anadrol's got a pretty low binding affinity for the androgen receptor.
So do you think if you say Anadrol has a low binding affinity, does it apply to its metabolites as well, or
No.
it doesn't? So do you think the metabolites produced by Anadrol then has higher binding affinity, possibly, to the androgen receptors?
Mestenolone specifically has a very high binding affinity.
I see.
So mestenolone is actually marketed in, well, I don't know if it's marketed. It's still available in Japan. A lot of really cool steroids that people have never heard of are still available in Japan. And yeah, so, it as a pharmaceutically available drug, it had to go through, whatever amount of testing was required. Mistanolone has a really, really high binding affinity for the androgen receptor. But it's actually I don't want to get too deep into mistanolone. Mistanolone is kind of it's really weird because it's basically just 17 alpha DHT, right? Mm-hmm. So it functions really, really, really closely to DHT. Unlike some other DHT derivatives, which have like, well, anyway, we don't need to get too deep into it, but it probably propagates the majority of the acute strength benefits from anadrol. So voluntary force production is probably primarily mediated through the mistanolone metabolite of anadrol.
And would you say if you say, so you're basically saying that the androgenicity primarily maybe comes from the DHT metabolite that you just mentioned. My question is that the same case for the muscle building benefits of anadrol as well, or is that from something else?
Probably not. Just because DHT is it functions so similarly to DHT, and DHT is pretty terrible at mediating anabolic activity. So some anadrol does get into circulation in both a conjugated form where it might do something and an unconjugated form. The conjugated form is going to get filtered out by the kidneys. The unconjugated form is just freely floating around, but it can become unconjugated again. So the anadrol itself might mediate some action. The other metabolites, so it's got three metabolites that are produced in the liver, and then potentially other metabolites, whatever. It also supposedly binds to the estrogen receptor, and it's going to mediate some weird effect through the estrogen receptor, because it's not going to produce the exact same effect as estrogen is through the estrogen receptor. And that's where a lot of like the bloating comes from anadrol, where like you get this like you get a lot of water retention, kind of like D-ball, which is not like you're not going to get that from Anavar or T-ball or M-tren or something like that.
I've noticed though, like I haven't personally experienced any sort of bloating from anadrol, whereas like with something like what can I say, Trest, for example, I would notice a lot of bloating. So I haven't noticed any bloating personally. So I don't know if it's do you think it's a person by person thing where your reaction to the drug would differ? And also another question, I've also heard some anecdotal reports about anadrol maybe exacerbating or causing gyno. Is that because of this as well, or does it have anything to do with any progesterogenic activity or something?
So it's funny because if you're on any of the bodybuilding forums or any of the bodybuilding discords, you'll definitely hear people say that anadrol has progestogenic activity, or that it modulates the prolactin receptor. But I haven't found anything. In fact, if you look into any of like the surface sources for basic, like right here, you've got a PubChem URL for oxymethylone open. I'm sure if we scrolled through this, you'd find something about the fact that oxymethylone does not have any progestogenic action. So it's funny that you get so many people saying that it does when it seems to have been tested and shown that it doesn't. I haven't read the study where it supposedly has been tested and shown that it doesn't, but I've read repeatedly on websites like this PubChem that it does not have progestogenic activity. Not sure about prolactin, never read anything on any official websites like this about prolactin. I would assume that, so like anything, so first off, nobody's taking anadrol by itself. Everybody's taking it probably with a testosterone base, and with any other, collection of other anabolic steroids or other drugs. People can get gyno without taking any any anabolic steroids at all. They just get it naturally. And so if somebody were to take Anadrol and get gyno, it could just be that they're more sensitive to gyno than somebody else. And the way that it's mediated is probably through the estrogen receptor.
Right. In terms of, so you did mention that a lot of the pre-workout, the androgenicity comes from the main metabolite that you mentioned, which I forget the name of, that you said. Yeah. Would you say Anadrol as a drug is better than that in an oral form? I shouldn't say in an oral form. Would you say Anadrol is better than directly taking, what was the drug's name again? Mestanolone?
Mestanolone, yeah.
Would you say Anadrol is better than Mestanolone in a pre-workout context?
Good question. So Mestanolone, as it is available in Japan, is just so it's if I recall correctly, it's hydroxylation. And I'm not a chemist here. This is I'm literally just reciting from memory something that I've read somewhere. It's hydroxylation at the C2 section of the molecule is the creation. So what you get left with is the mestanolone is still 17 alpha alkylated, and so it's still orally bioavailable. So you take mestanolone orally, it should have relatively the exact same oral bioavailability as Anadrol or any other 17 alpha alkylated steroid. So I think mestanolone at the same milligram per milligram dosage is going to probably give you way better strength effects than Anadrol will, but you're going to miss out on those other two metabolites, and you're also going to miss out on Anadrol by itself. And so you're going to miss out on the estrogenic effect of Anadrol. And as we know, estrogen is anabolic. What the effect of that, I mean, like if you think about this 7C estrogen produced by trestolone, it is substantially more powerful than normal estriadol, right? Mm-hmm. I don't actually know how strong the Anadrol's effect is on the estrogen receptor, right? It's not well studied. Mm-hmm. But if it causes gyno, it's probably pretty strong. It might be stronger than normal estriadol. And so you're going to miss out on that estrogenic activity. You're going to miss out on whatever the anabolic activity of Anadrol is. Even if it has a low binding affinity, that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have a really powerful effect on the the anabolism of the muscle tissue when it binds to the androgen receptor, because those are two separate measurements, right? And you're going to miss out on those other two. I mean, if you really wanted to like drive strength, I guess a neat, like an interesting thing to do would be to take, instead of, for example, 50 milligrams Anadrol, take 25 milligrams Anadrol and 25 milligrams mestanolone, just to get the most out of the mestanolone, but then also have the benefits of the Anadrol, perhaps.
What would you say the benefits of Anadrol is, though, that mestanolone doesn't give?
Well, so one problem with mestanolone is that unlike other DHT derivatives, it is a substrate for, oh, Jesus Christ, what is that? It is the enzyme that breaks down DHT. And so mestanolone is really short acting because it's going to get broken down in tissues by this enzyme, which also makes Anadrol, in my opinion, a more hair-safe DHT derivative than other DHT derivatives, because other DHT derivatives, they don't get broken down by this enzyme. And so they could ultimately lead to exacerbated hair loss, whereas Anadrol does get broken down, so it has less of it gets to sit around in the hair follicle for less time to miniaturize it.
Did you have something else to say, or?
No, I actually forgot the question.
I was asking, what would you say are the benefits of Anadrol over
mestanolone,
just mestanolone, that you haven't mentioned already, that would push someone to take Anadrol over mestanolone?
Anadrol is definitely longer lasting. That's because it's the mistanolone is going to be metabolized by this 3-alpha hydroxylase enzyme, for example, and Anadrol's not.
Would you use Anadrol to actually drive growth in a cycle, or would it just be, do you think, leveraged for its pre-workout benefits or other benefits that you have already mentioned?
I think they go hand in hand. So I think that Anadrol is known for producing a lot of aggression, and it's known for producing a lot of voluntary force production. It makes people stronger in the short term. It's not just about the fact that it makes you stronger, it builds strength over time, which it also does. It acutely makes you stronger when it is circulating in your system. And so being stronger in the moment, having higher motor unit recruitment in the moment is going to give you more gains. Like, it is anabolic by itself. It is an anabolism driver. People have been using it like that for years, very successfully. Nobody argues that it's not a fantastic driver of anabolism. It's just that the side effect trade-off is so high, just by virtue of being like, you have to take more of it than you would milligram per. So it scales better than other anabolics, but it doesn't have. You actually have to take more of it, like 50 to 150 milligrams, or sometimes much higher than that, in order to get the effects that you would get from a lower dosage of other anabolics. Those other anabolics just don't scale as well as Anadrol. Like, you can't take, 150 milligrams of D-bol or 150 milligrams of Anavar and get the effect that you get from Anadrol. You just can't. So Anadrol is absolutely superior to other orals for driving anabolism, and it's superior for driving strength and aggression in the gym. And that strength and that aggression is going to give you a better workout, which is going to end up giving you better gains. So I think it absolutely is an anabolism driver for sure.
So I get that, but chaining off on something you mentioned about the side effect trade-off, how bad do you think the side effects are? And I just pulled up the toxicity bit of this NCBI thing, which isn't necessarily the side effects. But how bad do you think the side effects are? And does it get worse as you scale the compound? So is it much worse when you take 100 milligrams versus 50 milligrams? And how liver toxic is it?
It's going to be basically the same degree of liver toxicity as other 17 alpha alkylated steroids. It is going to be, you have to take more, you usually take more milligrams of Anadrol than you would D-bol, T-bol, estrol, or Anavar, maybe similar to Anavar potentially. And so because of having just more milligrams of a 17 alpha alkylated steroid, you're going to have more liver toxicity. Its anabolic to androgenic ratio is worse than a lot of other orals, and the androgenic action in the liver is also very bad for the liver. And the fact that mistanolone is basically just a 17 alpha alkylated DHT molecule, it has a very high androgenic action in many tissues. I don't actually know how much. So for example, DHT is 5 times more potent than testosterone in the hair follicle or in the prostate. Now, I don't know off the top of my head how much stronger DHT is than testosterone in the liver. It's very, very possibly much stronger than testosterone in the liver. So you're looking at a lot more. If there's multiple angles here, I would say it's pretty fucking bad for the liver compared to other oral anabolics. So you really got to run it for a much lower amount of time, where you really got to crank the milk thistle, the TUDCA, and the NAC, for example. Yeah.
In terms of preventing some, I mean, I think I was going to go into another topic where would you consider using something like maybe finasteride? But then again, does finasteride really prevent negative outcomes when it comes to prostate when you're taking something like this? It doesn't, right?
It doesn't know because finasteride is a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. 5-alpha reductase is an enzyme that converts testosterone to DHT. Anadrol is already a DHT derivative. It's not a substrate for 5-alpha reductase enzyme. So finasteride doesn't help with anadrol, unfortunately. So no.
But I'm guessing something like RU would help to an extent with preventing any hair loss outcomes if you apply it topically. You can't really rub RU on your prostate. I don't think so, at least. But it is something you could possibly try.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work. I'm sure there's a couple guys I could name that, you know, they'd hop right on that idea. But for sure, for hair, absolutely, RU is the way to go when it comes to almost all steroids. I would say RU is the way to go.
I would chain into another conversation here, but I'm gonna try and avoid that. I was gonna talk about the binding affinity of RU not being that strong, but let's not get into that right now because that's a topic for a whole other video. In terms of Anadrol, I'm trying to think that if there is anything further to discuss. What is this about may cause cancer? Is it just a standard warning that they have for a lot of these oral steroids, or is there anything that we should know about in particular related to Anadrol that would lead to outcomes that cause cancer?
I mean, I've read about Anadrol causing non-malignant growths in the liver. I know that there are a lot of hormonally sensitive tumors, and I mean, like if you get prostate cancer, you're gonna treat that with an anti-androgen therapy. If you got breast cancer, you would treat it with an anti-estrogen, an aromatase inhibitor, or something of like a SERM, or you even treat it with androgens actually. But yeah, basically all anabolics are capable of causing cancer. But I mean, if you microwave a potato, it can cause cancer. So I feel like it's just like you got to put it in there, right?
Yeah, but then again, that's like those buildings in New York where you have like warnings saying that it's using materials that cause cancer. That's really what I wanted to know, if it's just a boilerplate thing to have in there, or if there is anything in particular. For example, like cardarine causes more cancer outcomes than maybe other things. Well, it is arguable, but it does.
Right.
So I just wanted to know if it was something like that, or if it's nothing really to be worried about.
I mean, I would for sure say if you're going to be using any anabolic steroids, you should talk to your proctologist, even if you're way below the age where in your country you would normally get your first prostate exam. I would go and I would schedule it basically within the first year that you're on steroids, and I would probably follow up more frequently. Like every country has a different protocol for how often you should get a prostate exam. But if your country is every 5 years, for example, which I believe is in Germany, you should probably get it done more frequently than every 5 years. I mean, my proctologist said I could get it done every 2 years because steroids are an increased risk for prostate cancer. And I think that's the responsible thing to do in that case.
I mean, then again, that would chain up on a lot of things where it's really good to get organ imaging done. It's possibly better to get, you know, your blood work done and have a record of everything. And I would say even if you haven't started using steroids, if you're gonna use steroids in the future or use any kind of PEDs in the future, it's good to have a chain of blood work and organ imaging done when you're natural. Just so that you have a history of medical records to go back and look into to see trends. Because for some people, they just get like the one blood work done when they're natural, and then they go on something, and then your blood work is never going to be the same after that, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
It's always just better to have a history of everything as a natural before you go into any of this. But yeah, it's a good thing to mention.
Absolutely. And I mean, in some countries, it's really difficult. In Canada, for example, it's really tough to convince your doctor. As far as I know, you can't even go in and get an MRI. You can't pay for an MRI in Canada. You know, your doctor has to go.
Do you not have like Bupa clinics that are private hospitals that are not linked to the major, the social healthcare system that you can go and pay in? I swear you can get a referral. You can, the thing is, you still need a referral, but it's just that they will give one to you if you talk to them. They're more likely to give you one than your GP that's linked to the government.
That's interesting. I mean, because in Germany, you can just pay for blood work out of pocket. You can't do that in Canada.
You can. You just need to get. I would say if you're in Canada, I don't know about anyone else. I would say get on Bupa insurance with some amount of excess. Go see the Bupa doctor, and then ask them to refer you, and they would most likely refer you, and you would be paying for the excess, but you would still, by virtue, get your data, which you need. But the only thing is, if there is something bad in there, your policy might go up in terms of the premium that you're paying, or there are going to be outcomes like that. But if you're not worried about that, then this is a way to do it.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware that was even a possibility. I just did a quick Google, and it looks like private clinics. There are some private clinics, but there are no private hospitals. So it looks like private hospitals. We've only had public hospitals for 56 years. We've only had public hospitals. There's actually a news article here from the Star saying that 9th of March 2022, they may be allowing private hospitals again for the first time in forever, and maybe very specifically in Ontario. But it looks like it says here Ontario currently has 1,000 private clinics. So I had no idea that there was even private clinics. So would they have MRI machines in a private clinic, for example?
Yeah, any clinic that can afford it can get one. So
wow, interesting. I wonder how expensive an MRI costs.
I mean, that's I would say that's really, it varies, but I would say it's going to cost you at least like 400 Canadian minimum.
Wow.
Yeah, but if you have like an insurance or something that you can fall back on, then it's not a problem. But then again, we're going to go off topic on this, but I think that pretty much sums up the Anadrol video, unless you have anything else to mention. Otherwise, we'll just call it off here. And
no, I think that's I just made a little bit of closing stuff here, and that is basically that so we're talking about basically the big daddy of common anabolic steroids. Like if you're looking to produce voluntary force production, and you're looking for enhanced strength over time, both have been clinically documented with Anadrol. Increased anabolism is well documented. I mean, it's obviously clinically documented as well, but within the community, it's very highly lauded as one of the best compounds, one of the best oral compounds. There is a related compound that I'm a huge fan of that I'd love to do another video on in the future, and that is huperzine A. And it's really similarly, it's very similarly involved with how strength is produced mechanically in the human body. And maybe we'll go a little bit deeper into motor neuron recruitment and how Anadrol affects that in the huperzine A video. But I think that huperzine A and Anadrol are probably, in my opinion, unless you're looking at something fucking crazy like halo testing, which I do not recommend, Anadrol is basically the big boy of the strength scene in the non-natty section. And I think huperzine A is basically the big boy of the natty scene. So, and they're both very closely related to how they work. So I think, yeah, in closing statement, if you're looking for a strength driver, Anadrol's the one. for non-natties, and huperzine is the one for natties. And so if you're a non-natty, you should be using both for sure.
All right, great, solid. I'm gonna stop it there.
Yeah.
Once again.